I've taken you away from all your friends. Your family is all around the world. I led you up the Hillbilly road to horseflies and lizards. Chapter 39. I led you up the Hillbilly road. I'm often asked why Springbrook. In the Mallee, while we never worked on Sunday, Mum and Dad only ever took 2 weeks holiday a year. Mum was never keen to go to the same place, but every Christmas after harvest it was time to head to the beach. I have vague memories of a trip to Sydney and Brisbane, and it rained the whole time. That was not good for camping. One year we went to Mildura simply because it had an Olympic swimming pool, one of the first in the bush. We swam with delight in that pool every day. That year I discovered flippers. Wow, I could swim twice as fast and go a lot further than before I ran out of breath. One day the New Zealand Prime Minister Robert Muldoon was there inspecting the pool, and I gave him a demo of my speedy swimming. Even today I prefer to swim with small flippers. My feet are skinny and useless as 2 sticks. I reckon there should be flippers under the aeroplane seats as well as a life jacket. By the time I was a teenager, Mum had discovered surfers' paradise, the Gold Coast. Wow, this was really something different. 2-story motels with swimming pools. We were all so happy there that they invested in a couple of units on the boulevard. The building was called the Sands. Eventually it was knocked down and rebuilt and called Zenith. Poor Mum and Dad never made much money out of the units. The managers were crooks. Many years later, in 1976, Mary Kay and I stayed in the unit at Zenith. I was keen to see some rainforest up in the mountains, and Mum said, "You need to take a drive up to Springbrook." So off we went up the winding road, not knowing what we would see. I just loved the road and the subtropical scenery. But more than that, there was also the little patches of old dairy country where the forest trees were much more visible in a paddock and were able to show off their beauty. While I have a reputation for being a greenie, I also respect how hard the previous generations worked, scratching out a living from the bush. So the patches of kikuyu grass with the magnificent rainforest specimens are a heritage worth preserving. That's different to clearing for closer settlement, and I'll fight against it. What's left should be left as it is. So after walking under the waterfall at Purlingbrook Falls and checking out the view from the Bestival Lookout and the many wonders high up where the rainforest becomes temperate, I noticed a for sale sign as we coasted back down the hill. 10 acres for $20,000. Walking through the bush on the block led to the discovery of an unbelievable view of the Nummaba Valley. I remember thinking that the old dairy country I could see below had a lot of ornamental foreign trees on it. Not having seen rainforest specimens in the open before, I assumed that they were from the Northern Hemisphere. After all, Aussies planted many trees that were not native to our country, while we were still unaware of the beauty of our own trees. It was important to me, when I purchased the block, to know what was there. Now I can look at it from above where the cottage is and point out where things are. My bit of rainforest was selectively logged in the past, but all the original species are still there. I have a red cedar tree that would be hundreds of years old. It was left because it was not tall and straight. It probably covers half an acre. What a heritage to leave future generations. I do have my eye on a crow's ash tree that was felled maybe 40 years ago. They took a 3-metre log and left the rest. It has so much natural oil in it that it's still as solid as the day it was cut. That timber is rare now. It's been highly prized as ideal for dance floors because of its high oil content. We cut the end off and my mate Mick made a huge chopping block out of it. If you count the rings, it adds up to being about 400 years old. The young crow's ash trees on the paddock are very ornamental. Their pale green leaves contrast beautifully with the dark green hoop pines. All this diversity on just 170 acres will give you some idea why I object to clear felling in old-growth forests. It's unimaginable to think of my small forest being turned into a tree farm with 2 or 3 species of trees when there are thousands of different living things relying on it being left as it is. A bird, bat or lizard has claimed every hollow branch. It's a city with no empty accommodation. Now our neighbour runs about 50 head of cattle on the grass. The lantana on the edge stops them venturing into the forest. Lantana, an introduced species, isn't that bad in this situation. It dies away in the forest shade and protects the soil when the forest is cleared. When Meg and I got together, there was really nowhere to go except the cottage at Springbrook. At that stage, it didn't have power. I used a generator. The kitchen was very basic. The few chipboard cupboards were beginning to swell. The gas fridge was inadequate, and on it went. Hardly, I guess, what Meg expected. Mary Kay had never shared my dream of one day living there, so back then it didn't seem to be worth developing the cottage, when it was really just a man's shack. So here we were, completely in love, but both out of very comfortable suburban homes. It was romantic, sure, but I think Meg was wondering what the hell she had fallen into. I also had a rented apartment in the centre of Sydney, but it was in a state of needing refurbishing too. In fact, every time we had a dinner with friends, I felt as if I had let Meg down terribly, as all our mates had beautiful kitchens. But it was just a matter of time. Meg now has 2 kitchens that are state-of-the-art, you might say. Not extravagant, but beautifully designed by Meg to suit her great love of cooking. Me, I'm a short-order cook. I can do any kind of breakfast or pasta, but I rarely cook anything else because Meg finds cooking relaxing and usually hunts me out of the kitchen. For the cottage at Springbrook, I'm glad she chose deep cherry red drawers and cupboards with touches of timber here and there. They add colour to the place and are a perfect foil for the wooden rafters and soft lichen green walls. I'm not as hell-bent on perfection as Meg. I love to let things happen to a degree. That way the cottage will end up with character that we didn't expect. My mate Mick, who is very clever with hardwood, turned up and suggested a great idea for the architraves using the hoop pine I've had cut and stored in willow shed. Mick built the fireplace surround back in the late 80s out of the bridge timbers of the old Nerenwood Bridge. Before we constructed it, we had to dig the gravel from the cracks. The high shelf above it is made from a large collapsed stool from outside the Purlingbrook store. I bought it by giving $10 to the local bushfire brigade. The fireplace will always set the tone of the cottage, but originally that space was a cupboard. I just love the way things develop and change organically. A mistake is often a godsend. In Australia, we are surrounded by astounding resources. With that in mind, a stroll down a riverbed can be a real treasure hunt. Places such as the Pilbara in Western Australia inspire me constantly. I'm now obsessed with rocks and what I can do with them at our bush home. My permanent outdoor barbecue area at the cottage at Springbrook resembles a stock camp, but also has an old enamel fuel stove. I love to spend time around the fire, smoking 4-quarter lamb chops and cooking veggies in a camp oven. It keeps me in touch with the simpler life of our forefathers, and I love it. I have a good collection of kerosene lamps that light up the tall trees around me, and it becomes home after the sunset has calmed my mind. I can fully understand how drovers and miners always prefer to spend their days that way. I thought by now, in my late 60s, I would spend a lot of time with my grandkids, but I'm still as creatively active and enjoying the stage as ever, perhaps even more so. Up at our mountain hideaway, I've been preparing for 20 years for the day when I could spend time doing things with grandkids. I have a big pile of mulga, gidgee and other timber to make things for them. Now that Hawkesbury, my oldest grandchild, has reached a good age of 7, that time is getting closer, I hope. It's a young adventurous paradise up there. I can't wait to show him my secret cubby house in the forest made of stone. Someone recently was quoted saying, "Jono is an 8-year-old in a 60-year-old body." Hey, that's flattering to me. I'm pleased to hear it. I've always been away with the pixies when my mind is on creative ideas. Meg gets a little frustrated with me when I'm not listening, but at least I'm 300% better than my own dad. I wonder if he ever heard what I said. I've inherited that problem, but I fight against it. I was a hopeless student, a dreamer, still am. On the other hand, I can concentrate for days on the lyrics of a new song, or completely construct a building in my head or a painting. What about my attempts at art? Well, maybe I crave art because I'm not bound to stick to what I'm known for, like I am as a songwriter. I know on which side my bread is buttered, so I'm not about to lose my fans by expanding too far musically. But painting and sculpture, well, there's no limitation there for me. I'll die happily exploring my limits. No one has to like it at all. That's real freedom. I've always found it easy to design lettering, so it's understandable that I ended up designing some of my album covers. My first contribution was a painting of the mallee tree and ute on the back of the Mallee Boy cover. A few years later, I completely designed and painted both sides of the Warrigal album. Then I painted the cover for the Rip Rip Woodchip single. Years ago, when we covered the floor of the extension at our Epping house with cork tiles, there was a pile of tiles left over. These 30-centimetre squares were the ideal surface to paint landscapes of my favourite areas in Australia. They were reproduced as greeting cards. We sold most of them as merchandise to fans, but I kept some for my own use as well. I still use them to respond to special fan emails and letters. I've never really pursued that part of my creativity, so therefore I'm not much more than an illustrator at this stage. The special edition of the Big Red album also includes illustrated cards that relate to some of the songs. They're just rough sketches, really. I'm always drawing, especially when I'm in Sydney or waiting around somewhere, so they were put to good use with the album. I mainly draw for fun and not as a profession. It's not surprising, then, that my earliest recollection of drawing is sketching Donald Duck. Donald Duck! The Hillbilly Road album is very much about the early period of my new life with Meg. Beach of Love was loosely written about the fact that Meg loves swimming, a couple of kilometres a day if she can. Catch a Virgin I wrote when she had to go back to Sydney while I stayed another week at Springbrook. Better Than a Picture was inspired by one of the incredible views of the wilderness from the property. Dark Irish Eyes is about her, even though she's not Irish. And Hillbilly Road, Meg's favourite on the album, was written the night before her birthday when she was just a little teary about being away from her family and friends. In the long run, however, it was another song with a Springbrook connection on Hillbilly Road that struck the biggest chord with my audience, Sidey. Our neighbours at Springbrook, Ross and Denise Gilbert, have a daughter, Jennifer, who I noticed was always in her dad's shadow as she was growing up. She loves cattle and the bush and is the apple of her father's eye. I also had an email some years before from a lady in Western New South Wales describing a woman on the land who took over the family property when her dad was killed in the Second World War. This lady had run the farm ever since. The name Sidey came from my ex-brother-in-law's description of his son Jason, who was nicknamed Sidekick, which became Sidey. I realised that Sidey would be a good girl's name. I'm very proud today that quite a few baby girls have been named Sidey since the album was released. I'm sure many of the parents don't realise it's short for Sidekick. The other thing that gives me a buzz is how often a young woman will come up to me after a show and tell me that she's her dad's Sidey. It's the kind of comment that makes a songwriter very happy. It's great to know that a song has such an effect on people. Sidey. She walks like her old man, overactive and thin. She laughs at all the same things that make her father grin. She's only 15, no brothers in her clan, and her father calls her Sidey, his right-hand man. She can drive a tractor or curse a useless dog, shear a sheep, strain a fence or cut a 9-foot log. She was meant to be a boy, but didn't go to plan. But her father loves his Sidey, his right-hand man. But the boys in the town today are turning their heads. Is that really Sidey, that tomboy kid of Ted's? She used to kick the footy, win every race we ran. Ted knew the world was changing for his right-hand man. You won't find her in the kitchen. She won't make a bed. She'd rather make a sheep crate with the welder in the shed or just go out there in the bush doing what she can, just being with her father, his right-hand man. And her mother takes her shopping. It's time she bought a dress. Looking in the mirror, not bad, she must confess, but I'd rather have that pair of jeans and boots if I can. She's still her father's sidey, his right-hand man. And the boys in the town today are turning their heads. Is that really sidey, that tomboy kid of Ted's? She used to kick the footy, win every race we ran. Ted knew the world was changing for his right-hand man. Yes, her father loves his sidey, his right-hand man. There's inevitably a little bit of Meg on the album since Hillbilly Road. I consider Rescue Me on the Big Red to be my best love song so far. And it's been nice to know that a song about a new romance does strike a chord with many people my age. Second marriages are very common these days. When Meg and I married in March 2013, I wrote a song for the occasion, which is on my 50th album, Honest People. I'm still writing love songs like I'm in my 30s, but sometimes I think that perhaps those songs are for younger people to sing. I keep saying that I probably only have one more original album in me. I don't need to write any more songs because it's already hard to fit all the songs I like doing into the show. But despite that, when a good idea comes, I have to work on it. It actually keeps me playing guitar at home and my voice in good shape. It's still fun creating songs from nothing, but bugger it, that means having to try it out on my audience. If they like it, then I feel obliged to record it. And if it's recorded, then it has to be promoted, and that means touring. It's a train I've been on since 1970, but it is going slower nowadays. People often ask me if I get tired of the travelling. The answer is, I get tired of airports. As for performing, I currently have on stage with me the 2013 Musician of the Year at Tamworth, Cole Watson, on guitar, and Dave Ellis on bull fiddle is highly respected in jazz and classical fields. He played bass on the Mallee Boy album and 2 other albums. What a pleasure this trio is. The best combo ever. I'm bringing back earlier songs now that never sounded so good. My stomp box is still my drummer. Of course, touring always places demands on those left at home. For this reason, I've never been on the road much more than 3 weeks at a time. It's a lot easier for me now because Meg is willing and happy to be my personal assistant, as well as carrying on her small business in children's literature. She loves travelling around this country as much as I do, and does at least 50% of the driving when we're on the road. At the end of every show, I come out after half a beer and she is right beside me while I sign autographs and CDs. She keeps in touch with special fans who have emailed their story or wish to meet me personally. Sometimes there are families who literally plan their trip to Australia from overseas to coincide with the show, and Meg points them out. I enjoy this part of my work. It keeps me in touch with which songs my fans like. I even get ideas from their comments. It's also nice to see my audience face to face. The little kids are a delight. I never forget how much it meant to me when I was a kid, when a performer said hello to me at the charity shows in Quambatook. I don't mind admitting that I'm aware that a handshake and a how you going with a fan is never forgotten. Each handshake or photo is like a brick in my foundation of loyal fans. After 44 years, I'm standing on quite a high wall. I can't understand entertainers who don't like signing autographs. It's tiring, admittedly, but at the same time, the love out there is invigorating. We are not above our audiences. As the producer of my own albums, I've always felt more comfortable in a down-to-earth setting where we could sit around, jam and rehearse the songs in the casual setting of a backyard. Hillbilly Road, The Way It Is, Gunya and Chandelier of Stars were all recorded at Epping in suburban Sydney. Steve Newton, my engineer at the time, rented the house from me and converted the garage into a studio called NREC after his late brother Eric Newton. Pipe Dream was also recorded in his garage before that. Steve also felt more at home in his own environment. I lived in Epping as well during this time, so it really was like having my own studio. The final product on an album is my decision in terms of the musical elements coming together. That is, the balance of the instruments, the performance, and how far out the voice sits and so on. However, I've always listened to and asked for other opinions. So over these albums, Steve and Phil Matthews, my manager at the time, put in their 2 bobs worth. There would even be arguments, but the buck always had to stop with me. After all, I was the one who was paying, and I'm the one who has to live with the result for the rest of my life. So I can't blame anyone but myself for recordings that don't gel. And no matter how hard you try, you never achieve that magic on every track. There are just so many factors. I sometimes think that a hit is a fluke, but generally, for my market, it's when the lyrics hit the spot for a lot of people. On one stage, Steve and Phil reckoned it was time I handed over the production to someone else. I fought against them quite vigorously. Right or wrongly, much of the fun as a creative writer is also to create the recording. As soon as I write a new song, I begin to hear some of the production, like where the bass comes in, what kind of guitar, harmonies and so on. I also believe in letting good session players have an input. That's why they get the job. They're also creative. A couple of times I've let another producer have a go and I hated the result. It wasn't my sound. It's a bit like allowing an architect free rein to design your home. You could end up with something you can't live in. Having said that, though, I co-produced my 50th album, Honest People, with someone who approaches his music the way I do, Matt Fell. In other words, he's not too fixed with ideas before I record and allows a song to develop using different sounds. It can be so much fun, and it's the unexpected that so often makes the difference. In December 2013, I resigned as President of the Country Music Association of Australia, CMAA. It caused a great deal of unexpected controversy. I was the only founding member of the CMAA who was still on the board. It was formed in 1992. I'm very worried that the Aussie culture of our music will be watered down by people who don't care about anything but their own agendas. They judge our music using an American yardstick. You may think that what I've said is just because of my own agenda. Maybe so, but it's also for my country, not just for me. I've been criticised for not staying on to effect change, but I've done all I can, mainly by example. Unfortunately, that wasn't enough. I was only 1 vote. I have 25 golden guitars. I don't need any more. I have always encouraged new artists who aren't worried about sounding like our American counterparts. Surely we can and are developing music about our country that is unique. Imagine if Willie Nelson or Johnny Cash tried to sound like us. They would be laughed out of the business. It's all about believing in yourself and our unique character. I just can't say I'm fair dinkum with an American accent. It'd sound ridiculous. I think some of us are well on the way to developing a country music that isn't in the same bag as the United States. It's music of and for our country, which is different to just country music in the musical genre sense. Perhaps we will come up with another name for it one day. In the not-too-distant future, I predict that the pseudo-American accents at the Tamworth Festival will be frowned upon. People will think, did we really sing like that in the old days? As I've often said publicly, the likes of Slim Dusty, Buddy Williams and Stan Costa kept open the gate that Banjo Patterson and Henry Lawson unlocked. I've given that gate a nudge, and I hope artists like Sarah Storer will push it further. Unfortunately, I see many Australian country music artists pay homage to Australia while being entrenched in the American country music culture. I'm not knocking artists like Keith Urban, who have beaten the Americans at their own game, but I can't call it Australian country music. At the Tamworth Festival back in January 2013, I was reminded of the good people in our music industry. I was terribly sick. My greatest fear with touring is the singer's enemy, the common cold or flu. For years I've prided myself on never cancelling a show because of a bad throat. On the morning of my regular evening concert in the Tamworth Town Hall, I had already appeared on the Sunrise TV show but didn't know if I could carry on that night. Before I fell into a deep sleep on the floor, David, my manager, said, "Leave it to me," his favourite expression. By the time soundcheck came around, he and Meg had contacted artists who were in town to see if they were willing to sing one of my songs in my show. Mike McClellan, Troy Casadale, John Stephan, the Sunny Cowgirls, Shane Nicholson, Harmony James, Anne Kirkpatrick, Tanya Kerdigan, Chelsea Basham, and my daughter Amy. Wow. We could never afford all that talent if we had to pay them. A lot of the time we didn't know what key the artists were going to sing the songs in, but Dave Ellis on bass, Cole Watson on guitar, and me on acoustic and stomp box managed all the different keys. Those boys can do anything and just adapted. It was the first time I felt like a real musician. I didn't know I had it in me. I managed to croak through a song in between the others, and the audience absolutely loved it. And it was fun to sing rough-voiced harmonies to my songs and be able to concentrate on my guitar. We donated part of the takings that night to Variety, the children's charity. I was blown away that all these beautiful artists knew my songs and were delighted to perform them with me. What a generous bunch of people. It will go down as a very memorable Tamworth. Despite the negativity over my CMAA resignation, I believe these people are my mates in the industry and I'll help them out in the same way.